I'm Charlie Smith, the editor of Pancouver, and today I'm pleased to be joined by the award-winning Canadian conductor Ken Hsieh. Like all great conductors, Ken exudes charisma on stage. He's also incredibly knowledgeable about classical music. He's a graduate of the Royal Conservatory of Music, University of British Columbia, where he majored in piano and percussion. Plus, he completed postgraduate studies in conducting in Japan at two top music schools. He's currently the music director of the Vancouver Metropolitan Orchestra, which is about to launch its 22nd season at the Orpheum Theatre on September 6th. Thanks for being here, Ken.
Well, thanks for having me, Charlie.
Now, what would you like people to know about the VMO's opening concert this season?
Well, being our 22nd annual season opener, I think this concert is always a concert now where we would really like to showcase a very established international or in this case national soloists because I think Canada is really one of the places where we are a little bit underrated, I think, in terms of uh, solo or musicians. We have a wide variety of great talents here in Canada. Last year, our opening concert was with a great pianist who is now on the faculty at UBC by the name of David Fung, and he came and blew us all away. And this year, I'm actually inviting Stefan Lemmeling, who is actually a um, a wonderful pianist who I knew from my days in Edmonton, and he is now the chair of the music faculty at McGill University. And Stefan, think it's one of the most knowledgeable guys I have ever met in my life. And so, the opening concert, I think even for the VSO or the Vancouver Opera is always a sort of a launch into the season, and it really sort of showcase what the orchestra is really capable of doing, and so what the season gonna look like. And I really am so excited for this coming 2024-2025 season because I think it's probably among one of our biggest season yet.
Well, you set the bar with high with the last closing concert with Katine, this Japanese sensation playing Gershwin
Yeah,
in the
I
Chant
mean,
Center last year. I was just blown away.
oh, it was
But
fantastic. Yes.
yeah, maybe I'll ask, what are some of the highlights of the upcoming season, Ken?
Well, that's a very great question. This year, or this season, I'm sorry, of course, we have Stefan Lamlan coming to play with us in the opening. In November, we have the very gifted Ryan Wong, who actually has played with the Vancouver Metropolitan Orchestra about maybe 10 years ago. Ryan Wong actually became a hit and a sensation when he was probably around 4 years old with Ellen DeGeneres. And, he became a hit. But right now, this kid is already making waves in Europe, especially, where he's studying in London, but he's performing in Paris, he's performing in Poland, you just name it. And so, what we wanted to do was give him an opportunity to perform the Chopin piano concerto before he goes into the competition next year. And we're very, very certain that he's going to do very well in the competition next year. The February concert is actually one that I'm truly looking forward to. It's featuring the renowned pianist Robert Silverman, who is probably among one of the North American top pianists today. And he's coming to perform the Beethoven Choral Fantasy. And the chorus we have is the Vancouver Bach Choir. And I couldn't think of a better choir to have than this choir because my esteemed colleague and dear friend Leslie Dollar had trained the choir to become, really setting the bar very
Oh,
high.
he's amazing. Yeah.
He is fantastic. And not only that, we're doing Carmina Burana in the second half, which I think it's a piece that everybody would enjoy, but it's a piece that I've had a lot of affinity with because when I was 15 or 16 years old, I remember playing this piece under Maestro Akiyama. And I also remember playing this in Powell River with the Vancouver Youth Symphony Orchestra. So for me to play percussion and then now to be conducting this piece is actually um, it's terrifying in a way, but it's also something I'm really looking forward to. And then our resident conductor is actually taking up the baton in April. He's conducting Eugenia Choi, who is actually a wonderful violinist who used to be on the faculty at UBC, but she now resides in New York. And she'll be coming to perform the Piazzolla Four Seasons, which I think it's a phenomenal piece. Um, and then we end our season with a very, very distinguished upcoming violinist. Just like you said, you saw Katin last year.
Oh,
We're going to
it
be
was
ending.
amazing.
He was amazing, exactly. And we're going to be bringing actually somebody who is in Japan making it in the same way as Katin as a violinist, Dio Ally. And she has been just winning competitions left and right, but then she has such a huge social media presence too, and just the way she plays is just absolutely outstanding. So, our
So
season
does she
is
have
at
a younger audience? Like this was the thing about Katyn that was so memorable was seeing young people who were, 20 to 25 years old lined up all the way down the Chan Center
yeah.
hall just to be able to, have their picture taken with him and it is kind of fun when you bring in these kind of social media sensations.
It is, and I think Leo is on the verge of getting up there. I don't know if you recalled about 2 years ago, our season finale concert also featured probably another social media how would you say sensation, Jasmine Choi on flute,
Yeah.
and she was absolutely sensational too, and so I think you know, in music right now, it's really um quite interesting because you don't only have to be a great musician, you also have to be a great marketer yourself. And I think it's looking at people like Katine or Jasmine or even Leo, I think there's a lot for me to be, learning from them
Yeah.
too.
And you could obviously play the piano exceptionally well. And I'm wondering what led you into conducting? How come you didn't stick with?
Well, it's actually very interesting because when I was about late teens or I think it was 19 or something, I was playing handball
Mhm.
and I crashed into the wall and kind of broke these two fingers.
Oh,
And so I don't play as well anymore, to be very honest. And I don't sit at the piano very long. I don't know why. I don't have the patience sometimes, but I do enjoy playing the piano from time to time. But what led me to conducting was actually this accident and going to a festival in Quebec where this Japanese lady came to me and said, you really suck on the piano. You should turn into conducting because I think she's like, I think this fits you so much more. At that time, I didn't know what conducting was. I had to watch about maybe 20 or 30 videos to see what a conductor really does. And then I was very intrigued by the way of a person's body sort of um, makes sound from other human beings. And it's fascinating because I make no sound, but the orchestra essentially is my instrument, right? So um, but I don't have total control because, I feel that conducting becomes more like a psychologist. Um, you have to be very good at reading minds and feeling it and really telling the person the right thing at the right time to get the best out of them. And that for me was I'm still learning how to do it, Charlie. So it's still I'm still I
You've been doing it for
it's
more than 2 decades. I'm also curious what you learned about conducting when you were studying in Japan.
Wow, you know why I went to Japan is it's a very interesting reason. It's because I always remember playing Kamina Burana under Maestro Akiyama. And you know, that time I didn't really watch the conductor too much, to be honest. But what I really appreciated was that Maestro Akiyama was so clear, like he was so clear in his beat that anybody can follow it. If you had an orchestra full of monkeys, they could follow him without any problem. Maestro Akiyama was the technique was so great, and I think why I went to Japan was because of what I knew was my weakness. And my weakness was that maybe I might have the feeling and the sensations of musical ideas, but how to express it. I think the Japanese are the best at doing that because they are very analytical and they kind of analyze everything and then they really fine point things. So if you look at, you know, the first year of studying conducting, I could never forget it. It was so square. You had to be within a television square and you had to conduct a four beat exactly, you know, in this pattern and in this order. And but after that, they kind of let you be and let you express because they know that you will be clear, but you will be musical. So Japan was really about that. And I always say this too, because everybody talks about Japanese cuisine or Japanese chef. The most amount of Michelin stars in the world is actually in Japan. And then the reason I think it because Japan had one of the most um, incredible consistency in what they do. And I think this is what is the key in anything, even as a conductor it the consistency of how you do your rehearsal and then how you do your performance and how you portray your musical ideas. I think that's the key. And Japan was really um, it was really what I needed at that time.
Fascinating. What led you to launch the Vancouver Metropolitan Orchestra?
That's a very good question. When I joined the VSO, Vancouver Symphony, and even before that, I was already kind of conducting a small how do you say ensemble made up of friends from university. What I really noticed was because I had a job the previous summer as the assistant conductor at Pacific Music Festival, which was in Sapporo, and I was 22 years old at that time, and I remember assisting all these great conductors, but the orchestra was the festival and the orchestra is actually made up under the idea by the great Leonard Bernstein, who actually we just celebrated his 104th or 105th birthday. Leonard Bernstein created this festival in hope for the young people to gain experience with you know seasoned professional from the Berlin Phil or the Vienna Philharmonic or New York Phil. What it essentially did was it created, I think, what is the missing gap in in what the music world had today. Because when we go to the university, we play a concert, but we would have maybe 8 to 10 rehearsals before the concert. Whereas in a very professional setting, you only have 2 days to really put everything together and then to present a finished product. And so I remember saying, you know, I should do something similar. Vancouver doesn't need another professional, you know, orchestra to compete against each other. What we needed was some orchestra would kind of fill that gap where it's like a co-op orchestra or internship. Where, but now that we became a full-fledged professional orchestra under the union, we're still keeping our mandate, which is to bring opportunities for the young ones. Because the young ones come and they perform and they gain their experience. Then when they apply to like the Vancouver Symphony or the Winnipeg Symphony, they have a better chance of succeeding in an audition.
Yeah, interesting. And you're born in Edmonton.
Hmm.
How did you get into music?
Well, number one, Edmonton was so cold, so you had to stay inside and practice, right? So, and it's quite interesting. Edmonton has an incredible amount of great musicians there. But Edmonton, I actually grew up in Edmonton during the Oilers dynasty when Wayne Gretzky with Mark Messier, Larry Curry, you just name it. I mean, we just had Oilers, slapped on our back and our knapsack, everything. But music was something I think my mother had a affinity of because she never got to learn music when she was young. And I remember going to one of my uncle's house and there was an organ, which was bought for my mom. And but my mom never really had the opportunity to learn it. And I think music was something that she always loved. I think my mom is, in a way, a very free-spirited person in many ways that she loved music, she loves the arts and culture, and it's just that, during that time, she never got the opportunity to learn it. And so I think what she essentially did was kind of pass her wishes on to me. And so, she was a very hardworking woman. She
Well, she
excuse me.
still is. She's still helping
Yes,
you out with the orchestra. And
she's probably one of the most dedicated volunteers in the orchestra. But it's actually nice that she's able to do something where she sees her love being realized,
yeah.
from her childhood. But I think for me, starting out with the traditional way, with the Asian parent with the bamboo stick hitting you and you know, learning piano and I learned violin and then percussion. Um, you know, it it was actually a joy. Piano I found was a little bit too lonely, because you're always by yourself practicing.
Mhm.
But when you make music as a violinist or as a percussionist, it's actually quite fun when you get to make music with others and to see how things can come together, or how things don't come together. It's actually quite fascinating either way. And I think, yeah, music is actually, it's essentially, I find now being conducting 22 years all over the world. It's just fascinating how you can click with certain people around anywhere, and sometimes you don't even have to speak. You just understand each other.
Interesting. Now, your mother and you're of Taiwanese ancestry, um,
Yeah.
and I'm wondering what it was like for you growing up Taiwanese Canadian in Edmonton, where guessing there weren't a lot of Taiwanese in
No,
Edmonton
we
in
were
those
one
days.
of interesting you brought that up because somebody was asking me when I was growing up in Edmonton how many Taiwanese family were there because I think essentially there was only four Taiwanese family and we knew them. But the thing was, why would Taiwanese people go from a place that is 40 degrees during the summer to a place that's minus 40 during the winter? It baffles me. You got an 80-degree range here, but I I think it was really for my father's opportunity as a engineer, and I think back then, when the oil industry was really booming at that time, um, my father really thought that Edmonton would be the next sort of um, the next Dubai, I guess, in our time. Unfortunately, I don't think many people like the weather. I think even Canadians in Vancouver don't like the weather in Edmonton. But um, studying music there and the people, one of the things was that we were heavily assimilated into that culture. And I remembered Edmonton being primarily a very European for some reason, a lot of Polish, a lot of Ukrainians. There was a lot of people who had come from Eastern Europe, I find. And what was interesting was everyone had an accent. Everybody had something, that was not Canadian about them, except the cowboys. We had a lot of those true Albertans who had been there for generations. But um, growing up there, I felt like we really assimilated into the culture that I really didn't think I was Taiwanese in the beginning, to be honest. I know
Well,
my yeah.
also the thing is Taiwan has a strong connection to Japan, historically and in
Oh,
modern times. And I'm wondering when you're in Japan, how does it feel or how are you received?
I'm still, it's interesting you say this because when I was a student, I really suffered a lot because Japan, it's not the Japanese people's fault, and I think, to be honest,
Or were
Japan
you
just
mistaken for being Chinese or
I
something?
was really mistaken for being either Chinese or American. It's very
Mhm.
strange, because I spoke English and people go, "Oh, you're from America." That's the first thing they say, no, and I would say, I'm Canadian because I'm Canadian by birth, and I was raised all my life in Canada. They don't understand that concept because they're like, why is somebody so with yellow skin still so um speaking English and I created a term for them that they sort of start to understand. I said, look, basically I'm you, but I just born and raised in Canada. I'm a banana. So a banana is, you're yellow outside and you're white inside and I I think nowadays the younger people are sort of adapting better to it. The older generation was actually quite difficult because they're very adamant to their culture. But one of the things I really appreciated was the close connection Taiwan had with Japan because, um, of course, Taiwan being a colony under Japan in the war, um, you know, it's it's it's
Yeah, there's
really
50
created
years of history where
it's 50
railways
years.
were built, and it was almost like Taiwan was being absorbed into Japan the same way Hokkaido was.
Exactly. And I think one of the things is that if you look at the like Korea or China or even the Philippines, there is some resentment against the Japanese for what they did. But when you look at what Taiwan going through, it's actually quite the opposite. They are
Yeah,
very,
it's a different relationship
it's a
in
different
a lot of
relationship
ways.
and they're appreciative because I think Taiwan had gone through so many different forms of government. And so, especially under Chiang Kai-shek, who had ruled Taiwan in with an iron fist and really in 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 many ways it was a dictatorship back then
Yeah.
when Chiang Kai-shek was there. So, the Taiwanese people started to appreciate what the Japanese had given them, especially with infrastructure, with the food and with the culture.
And culture, like with the piano and with the
Yeah.
Western watercolors, all these things
All
came.
these things. And
Yeah.
so that's why I think it's wonderful what they've done.
Mhm.
And so I think yeah, it's a very interesting relationship. And I think, there was an interesting poll done recently about how Taiwanese feel. And one of the questions I saw was what would you think if Japan had still colonized Taiwan? 78% of the Taiwanese people who were over 50 years old said we would be absolutely happy. And that was
Fascinating.
that was
Yeah, that
quite
really says something, though,
it
about
really
this
says something, isn't
nostalgia
it? Yeah, it's
and this
nostalgia, yeah.
kind of heartfelt feelings. I don't think
Mhm.
you get those numbers for Canadians wanting to be a part of America.
No, of course not. I mean, when we look at what's going down south of our borders, we're just thinking, my gosh, this is just chaos.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, you're right. I mean, Japan does have a special place in Taiwanese, mind, and I think it's vice versa too, because the minute I go there and people are like, oh, where are you from? And I said, well, I'm Canadian, and they're nice. And the fact that when you say you're Taiwanese, then it just goes up and beyond. And I think they sympathize a lot too with the Taiwanese people too, especially with what's going on today too. Especially
Yeah.
how Taiwanese are having a difficult time to have their own identity, right? So.
And one of the things we're doing, Ken, is we have the series, we're calling it Beyond Chinese, just basically to address
Mhm.
stereotypes and things like that. And I'm wondering, some see Chinese as a language or a nationality or an ethnicity or a race. And I'm wondering what goes through your mind when you just hear that word Chinese.
Chinese, I have to say that word is actually very, very broad, because I find if you talk to anybody from Hong Kong, for example, they will say, yes, I'm Chinese, but I am a Hong Kong Chinese, right? And so and then I'm sure if you talk to certain people who are living in the very western part of China who are maybe of Muslim descent. They still call themselves Chinese, but they are the Chinese Muslims, And I think one of the things that Chinese word has is that it's so broadened that it's taken out to, for example, um, to Singapore, that the Chinese Singaporean, and Malaysia, that the Chinese Malay.
Or
I
they use
think
the term Peranakan Chinese too. I don't know
yes,
if you heard that. Yeah.
exactly. But what I'm saying is that it's essentially, to me, the word Chinese is very similar to the word English. And I tell you why, because when you go to London, you're speaking English there. You go to America, you're speaking English. When you go to Canada, when you're speaking English. When you go to Australia, you're speaking English. Um, it but then these English people, do you call these people English? And it's very hard, no, because they have an identity too. So these people are Australian, or they're Canadian, or they're American, or the British, or even the Indians, in India.
Yeah, there's the
I
Hakka Chinese who go to India and they have the best Indian Chinese restaurants.
exactly, and that's what I mean, and that's why I think the word Chinese is sometimes the misconception right now is that it's really been associated with mainland China. And I think, yes, the mainland Chinese were probably, if you're looking at the history, yes, there is a lot of history back there when going back to the Qing dynasty, even way back before the Han and everything. And I think one of the things that Chinese, the problem is that you know, say that there is a particular Chinese ethnic group that does something that the world doesn't agree with, then the rest of us all get blamed for it too. And I think, but Charlie, I think on the other retrospect, it's because I do conduct very often in China too. And I conduct, in Sichuan, I conduct in Shanghai, I conduct Beijing, everywhere. It's just fascinating that, when you go there it's just so many distinct culture.
Well, that's what I
Even
was going to say is you must have pretty good insights into the diversity within China. Like each province has its own language and its own
exactly
culture and its own food. And
its
I
own
think
food.
people don't necessarily understand that or appreciate that in Canada. They look upon it as this monolithic entity.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, because I have a friend who always makes fun of us, in Taiwanese or Chinese or whatever it is. That he goes, oh, your Chinese food are so good. I go, what do you mean the Chinese food is so good? He goes, yeah, your kung pao chicken and your sweet and sour pork and everything. And I go, that's actually very Americanized Chinese food, and if you ever get to see, for example, I go to Chengdu in Sichuan a lot. And when you go there, and I said, you know, the food is just so incredibly spicy, and it's hot pot with all this numbing, what do you call it? Numbing pepper, these peppercorns that they numb your tongue. and it's a and they speak a different dialect there. But with Taiwan, I find that Taiwan is interesting in that, there's a huge influx of people who came from the Fujian province.
Yeah.
And so, I had the chance to actually visit Fujian, and it's quite fascinating that you see the language and the food and the way people speak and the people act. It's very similar to a lot of the Taiwanese people. I'm not saying all of them, but I'm just saying a good vast amount of Taiwanese people speak and act and do things the same way that Fujian people. So, like you're saying, are we all one? Yeah, we are technically all in one, but the problem is that over the time and over the amount of time that evolved during our history, we all start to have our own identity. And I think this is one thing that Taiwanese people are striving for, is that they're striving for their own identity. But the word Chinese, I think, is still, it's misconcepted in many ways, that, it's like saying the word English. Are we gonna call the British, no, I'm not the British. I mean, we're going to call Australians British when they're technically, by history, all convicts from Britain who
Yeah.
have been sent down there, right? So I,
Yeah.
uh, I really don't know, right? So, but then the Australians have their own ways now, and the other one was French, because I didn't know Canada. We actually have a very small French, how do you say, colony
Yeah.
in
There's
yeah.
Saint Pierre and Miquelon, the two
Some of it I
islands
didn't know. I
off of
didn't know
Newfoundland.
until
Yeah.
I only didn't know until last month,
Yeah.
and I didn't know they use euro there and they speak French, and I did not know, and I found it very fascinating, because I always think, oh, Quebec is Quebec, right? But people always say, Quebec is the French people in Quebec are the real French people. And I said, how so? And they said, well, they're still speaking the original French. They're still speaking as they haven't revolved and not evolved. And I could say the same thing like the Australians and the British, So I think everybody's just trying to strive for identity now. And Chinese is really one of those words that just became too broaden in my
I was going to
perspective.
ask you if there are any stereotypes you'd like to address, but you kind of answered that in your last thing, that there's just so much
Yeah,
difference within,
yeah.
and not to just paint everyone with the same brush.
I think there's a lot of stereotypes that, oh, you know, that Chinese people are good at math, and we're all people who save money, and we're all people who are cheap, or the list can go on, and I know there are a lot of comedians who made stereotype jokes about it, and I actually get a good laugh on it too. The stereotype, it's actually quite interesting. Some of it is actually true, and I think one of the things we have to be very careful about is that the stereotype of the people, which is like the Chinese, being if we're being portrayed as Chinese, or we're being portrayed as anything, is that your identity and have to be really reflective of um who you are as a person, more than what you're trying to be, I find. Because I think the first thing I would say about Taiwanese people, for example, is that um Taiwan is a small island of only what, 23, 24 million people, but um one of the first things I always say about Taiwan is the hospitality of the people. And I think that is one of the key things that I think really makes Taiwan stand out, is the hospitality. Whereas if I go to Chengdu in China, the people have such a great friendship and such a very Western, relaxed, and just a joie de vivre life, of China, and you would never have guessed that. And so that's why I think the perception of stereotype is that, yeah, we are Chinese, we are all small eyes, and we are all, we are all cheap, and we're all accountants, doctors, and engineers. I mean, look at me. I suck at math. I don't do anything well in terms of drawing, and I don't have a affinity with bubble tea or anything. It's and it's hard. And I think so these stereotypes that are out there, um, as much as some of them are actually entertaining and true, I mean, I think we also have to be very careful how much we stereotype certain
Yeah.
things.
Well, it
So
reminds me what you're saying about Chengdu is Tennyson King, who's this folk singer
yeah,
born in Hong Kong, and he's from Mississauga, but he's traveled across China and performed. And he says his favorite is Kunming in the
yeah.
south, and where
Oh,
he says
absolutely.
it's like a hippie hangout in
It is
China.
a hippie hangout. Yes,
And
absolutely. And I go to,
have you been
I
there yourself?
yes, I have
Yeah.
been there, and it's a very hippie. And he's right. It's a total hippie area to be in, and I actually love it there too. What I really find is that the people have their own identity and their own expression of how they how they live life, and I think that's why I don't like to criticize China or Taiwan or Japan or anything. It's because I want to be more respectful for the people, for their identity and who they are, and I rather take it that way because I think we are all essentially human beings, but we're all brought up differently. But I think you know yeah, a certain stereotype, when you talk about Singapore being very uptight and, but they got stuff done, whereas Malaysia, it's still very chaotic, still a lot of things going on. But yeah, I think, I think you're asking these questions, which I think will never be fully answered,
Yeah.
in our
But what
lifetime.
we can do and what you're doing, which I appreciate, Ken, is helping to break down the stereotypes and helping to see people in a more nuanced way, which is
Yeah.
really the purpose of what our series is about, in
Oh,
addition to
fantastic.
learning about your art, what you're doing as an artist.
Uh,
And I'll ask one final question,
sure.
because you've done a great job here. Where do you see your musical career going from here?
I think it's a great question. Do I really want to be conducting all the same Brahms symphony and Beethoven symphony every year? I'll tell you the honest truth answer. Yes, I do. And I tell you why. Because the older I get, the the more I know, the way my how do you say, taste and my
Yeah.
perspective and things change a lot. And so how I conducted Beethoven Symphony uh 15 years ago compared to today, it's completely different. And I like my interpretation now. I don't like my interpretation 15 years ago, but I get to see how my music uh in my perspective, it it I'm learning things, and I think it's getting better. What I really hope is that, I know if, for example, one of those great orchestras like Berlin Philharmonic comes with an offer to conduct the orchestra, I would not take it today. I don't think I'm ready. What I really like to do is to conduct all these great orchestras that I have. What I would say is like these B-tier orchestras that that I'm getting a lot of opportunities with to learn from them. And then, I feel like once I'm hitting into my 60s, maybe I would start to think, okay, I think I know enough that I can share this music with, for example, great musicians like those who have those of like Concertgebouw Berlin, maybe it might be in my 70s, but I'm striving to at least get to that point because every day what we have wonderfully here, Charlie, is our resources is that we don't really have to go to the library as much anymore to gain information about music, because a lot of things can be actually absorbed to the internet. And I love reading, Wikipedia about, for example, even if you even just something so random, like uh, I was just reading something about Wagner, because right now there's the Bayreuth festival in where they're doing all the Wagner ring cycles, and I love to read about the history of it, and I feel like, wow, how can it, how can I get there, and how would I be perceived, and what can I offer to them? And I think this is what it truly the mind of a musician is, that what can I offer to the musician that is going to make them interested, that make them respect the fact that I have studied and learned enough that they feel like even if they disagree with my idea, they will go with my idea. And I think this is something that I'm still learning every day.
Well,
And I
you're good
think,
at piquing people's curiosity, because when I interviewed you the last time, you were telling me about Beethoven's Fifth Symphony and how it related to Napoleon, and how Napoleon
oh,
kind of broke his heart when he declared
oh,
he
that was
was
the
the
third
emperor.
symphony. That was the
And
third
it
symphony.
was
Yeah.
so fascinating. So I was on the internet researching all of
Yeah.
this, and I thank you for that, because I didn't know any of that.
Wow, I
So,
mean, we learn every day, right? And I will never forget what the great conductor Lauren Mazel said to me when I met him backstage in his dressing room. I mean, I learned two things. I learned that eating a banana before a concert is good, because he had boxes of banana. I'm like, why do you have banana? There you go. Oh, the potassium, you eat this much banana, it's going to give you all this energy, calm the mind down. But the second thing he said was actually what resonated in my head, is that he goes, as time goes on, you're going to know more. But the fact that you know more makes it even more difficult in your career. And I find that very true, because I conducted this Schumann Symphony, which we're doing next week. I've conducted it in Vancouver. I conducted in Montreal Symphony. I conducted it um in China with the Suzhou Symphony, and in Japan. And now I'm coming back to this piece after doing it for 12 years. Gosh, Charlie, it's so difficult. I'm discovering more things, and it's making my life not miserable, but it's making my life more challenging. And how do I address it? So, that's something I really find the great thing about music, is that there's no boundary, and there's no right or wrong, but it's just each other perception and tongue. And so hopefully maybe one day I could conduct this with a great orchestra in the world, and that's where I strive to be. And then I think conductors, as I say, always start their life with a retirement and end their life, working. So uh
well,
so
that's a great note to end it on, Ken. And thank you
yeah,
very much for being so generous with your time. It's been a lot of
my
fun.
pleasure.
Okay, I've been speaking with Ken Hsieh. He's an award-winning conductor and music director of the Vancouver Metropolitan Orchestra.
Great, thanks, Charlie.